Hi, my name is Jeff and welcome back to my workshop. We're continuing work on our Waukegan Depot kit bash. We're using a Revell kit and modifying it to make it look like the Chicago Northwestern station in Waukegan, but painted and lettered for the Cincinnati, Chicago, St. Paul, and Pacific, a freelance railroad on the Arlington Heights Society of Model Engineers layout. So I'm working on the benches that came with the kit, and I'm just using a very pale green paint, kind of dabbing it on with a sponge to fade the color on these benches from a bright glossy green to something that's flat finish and looks like it's been out in the weather and in the sun a little bit, so the paint has faded with time. And then with the green on there and dry, get a little more in there on that sponge. Just want to make sure we get rid of the glossiness on here. By the way, if you've missed the first parts, any previous parts of this series, there'll be a link to the playlist featuring the entire series in the description below. Making sure we get paint into that corner where the back and the seat come together, just to make it look really nice. We'll let that dry, and then we'll come in and create a paint look with a little bit of pale gray and a little bit of espresso. Kind of look like there's some wood coming through. Just going to mix that in right in the same palette. I'm going to lighten it up a little bit with just a drop of that little bit of that pale gray. And then use the same sponge and just kind of mix them together. It doesn't have to be fully mixed, because if we have a little bit of variation in the color as we apply it, dabbing some of the paint off because I want a very light touch here. And then I just lightly put it on there to create that paled look effect. You can still kind of see the green showing through behind, but some of the paint has worn off with time and lots of people sitting there reading newspapers waiting for trains. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please make sure you give it a big thumbs up. Also, leave comments if you have any questions or suggestions. If you have a way of doing things that's a little differently, by all means, let me know. I'm always looking for and willing to try new techniques. So we're going to install these. They fit into these two holes on the side here, and then another set on the end. Get it in place, and then apply some glue to the back to hold them in place. And I'm using the Fowler Expert styrene cement that I've used throughout many of my videos. It's my go-to plastic solvent cement. This isn't sponsored, but that just happens to be the one I like. I like the control I get from the pin needle applicator on there. That cement also has a little bit of styrene mixed into the cement so that it also does a little bit of gap filling. It makes it easy to make a good tight joint with things. This one, just adding a little bit to the bottom just to make sure it stays in place. It's hidden well enough under the eaves of the roof that you're not going to see any scarring. Well, there you have it. The bench is in place along the side of the wall there. So now let's move on to our next part of the project. So we're at the club, and here's the layout in the area, and made a paper template of the spacing we have. You can see I've kind of drawn out where the station is going to be in the platforms. So we'll have a passenger platform along the main line, which is curving to the front, and then a loading dock area along the back where baggage can be loaded into boxcars. So I've added this to a piece of sign-making plastic and cut it out just using a sharp hobby knife and a straight edge. So now we need to turn this white plastic into something that looks like concrete. So this is my first test piece. I used some scrap material to do this, and there's things I don't like and don't like. I used started with porcelain chalk paint. I added some acrylic craft paints on top, pale gray and crushed stone. And then I also used an India ink wash to kind of blend everything and get it into the expansion joints I had carved. It's just isopropyl alcohol with India ink added. The problem is this looks more like asphalt than it does concrete. So I guess we're back to the drawing board and we'll do another test piece. I kind of like how the India ink got into the expansion joints, but you can also see kind of splotches and so forth come through, and it's way too dark. So now you can see a test piece. I did use 3 different methods. This looks more like concrete. I think the bottom looks like an age. The middle looks pretty new. And I think that's the way I want to go, towards the middle. So let's take a look at how we got there. I started by scribing expansion joints into the concrete, and I'm working on a test strip. The base is just so large that there's really not enough room for me to work on in my workspace with the camera. So I'm going to show you on this test piece, and then I'll use the technique on the base, but it'll be done the same way. So we're just going to scribe a line. My scale rule is nice because it's actually 7.5 feet HO scale feet wide, which gives me good size blocks with the expansion joints. So about 5 slices through gives me a nice deep cut that will show up well. And then we can take the joint. Easier to work from that way, but I want to work with the straight edge first. Okay, here we go. So now we're just going to do this again, scribe across. 5 light passes does the trick. And then to ensure my straight, I'm taking a second scale ruler, butting it against the first, and scribing my lines here. Once that's done, I can pull the first ruler out, leapfrog it over, butt it against this one, and I'm ready to scribe and work my way down as I continue. So you can see it's finished. Now let's start painting. We're going to start with the porcelain chalk paint. This gives me a good base color, and it also adds a little bit of texture. And I'm just going to use a sponge to apply it. I shook it up a little bit, and you can see some of it dripping off the lid. And this is a piece of sponge. It's a grout sponge that I purchased that I cut into pieces. In this case, I'm using fairly large ones. For detail work, I'd cut it into smaller pieces to get in there, and then I'm just dabbing the paint on. Combination of dragging and dabbing gives me good coverage and also helps increase the texture. So I have the texture of concrete as well. I want to put a thin coat of paint on there, just enough to cover it. But I don't want it so thick that it fills in the expansion joints with paint. So with that done, we'll let that dry. And now we're going to apply the India ink wash to the joints. And I want to get it in there, but I'm going to have a little bit of overflow, and that's okay. But we want the majority of it in the joint. By holding the piece kind of at a downward angle, it gets the India ink to flow into the cracks that we carved in the plastic. And we can use multiple coats of this until we get them as dark as we need to. But capillary action kind of drags it through. Once I'm happy with that, I'm using different colors. A combination of pale gray and vanilla, which is an off-white. Kind of lightens that gray, so it's not quite as dark. And I'm using about equal parts. So I'm just mixing them up onto, using a small cup as a palette here. When I do the big base, I'll probably end up using like a lid to a ice cream or sour cream tub as a palette, just because I can put more paint on there at once. It's bigger, more room to work. And I can even dab off and remove some. So I'm using the same sponge that had the chalk paint on it, because that works and there's no reason to waste it. Just dab some of it off. And then dab this lightly onto our work surface. We want to cover the ink that's stained on the top, but not get it into the crack, so we can still see the crack showing lightly, and it's light and subtle effect we're looking for. So as we'll finish this up, and then I'm going to show you the base with the expansion lines drawn on. So I have my guidelines to work with. You'll see those in a few minutes as we finish this. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please make sure you give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my next project or the last video on this one, which will be installing the base on the layout and mounting the station to the base. At some point we will do some luggage carts for this. So here's the finished sample piece, and here is the look of the base lined out, and you'll see the finished base in my next video. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this.